Well, good morning. I thought I would share another story with you. This was written by a very close friend back in 1996. It was a typical spring day in Georgia, rainy, humid, a slight chill in the air. The light had that special quality it only gets when the sun tries to penetrate rain clouds of just a certain thickness. New green leaves looked a color they never look any other time. Though the air was clear, you were aware of looking through it as if looking through water in a fish tank. There was that property unique to rainy days in spring that affected the way everything looked. It caused one to be expectant rather than depressed as a fall or winter rain will do. She sat occupied with thoughts of her mother, getting so old now, 83, but older in many ways than she needed to be. She remembered. That happens when one loses a spouse, they say. 30 years ago, her father had passed away quite suddenly of a heart attack. Her mother had dated some, but she always said that all the men were old and sick and never had their own money. The implication was they wanted hers. A few even made sexual advances to her, and she was in her 50s. Well, that doesn't seem so old to me now, she thought, but back then she seemed almost ancient. As if delivering a monologue, she recited to herself. But she never remarried. She was too much of a character to remarry. I cannot imagine why my father was attracted to her. They were so different. He liked classical music. She loved popular music. When they finally got engaged, she made him give away his pair of season tickets to the symphony. Up till that time, he had been attending with another woman, since Mom would never go with him. He was very quiet. She was a talker and a laugher. He stayed home every night. She went out one night a week to play canasta with the girls. She still remembered them. I saw a photo of Miriam from about 10 years ago. Still looks the same, but her poor husband looks very, very old. And Dottie's husband had once been in prison on Rikers Island. He ran the corner candy store when candy bars, gum, and lifesavers all cost a nickel. And Barbara's husband was the one who had boyfriends. I knew all this as a child. I didn't know what any of it meant. I was just privy to the information. I never took the thoughts any further back then. She remembered how they all sat around a card table, how they went from one house to another week by week, smoking cigarettes, laughing, and playing cards. I know why my mother married my father, she mused. She always said she married him because he was easy on the nerves. She observed, I never took that thought any further either. I guess she meant he didn't aggravate her. Maybe he didn't cross her. Maybe he didn't object to her card playing one night a week. Plus, he himself never went out. She thought about how they always seemed to get along. No fights in her house like you sometimes saw on TV. She thought back. One night she told me about an argument they had. Sitting up suddenly, she realized, oh my, I am a lot like her. She and my father argued, and he got his hat and stormed out of the house. Problem was, at the same time, a thunderstorm had broken out. He showed up at the door a while later, dripping wet. The hats back then were not meant to get wet. When she saw him with his hat all drooping down, water streaming from it down his face and clothes, she busted out laughing. She nodded, chuckling to herself. I know I would have done the same thing. She remembered more. The only time I know of that they argued, I was there. We were riding home from Long Island, having spent Sunday with my father's nephew's family. Something happened, and the next thing I knew, my father had pulled the car over on the thruway, gotten out, slammed the door, and walked off. My mother said he never would have left us like that, except my brother was in the car and he knew how to drive. I don't know how my father got home that day, but he did, and I never heard the incident mentioned again. But, she considered, I guess even so, he must have been easy on the nerves. She went on. I said my mother was a character. Others perceived her, when she was in her 70s, as eccentric and charming and interesting. They hadn't lived with the same person who acted the same and said the same things for 30 years, but I did learn to appreciate her more as I grew older and saw others appreciate her. She recalled, still performing her mental monologue. She had done 2 hysterical things that stand out in my memory. She broke 2 toilets. One was at her brother's house. Apparently, she leaned back against the tank. In New York City, all the apartment house toilets were the flushometer type, no tank in back, just a small pipe thing with the flusher on it. But this was a Sunday in Fort Lauderdale and a tank toilet. It was the only bathroom in the house, so she leaned back a bit too hard, and the tank just gave way and separated itself from its moorings. The water gushed everywhere. My uncle, having been a landlord for years and years, knew enough to turn the knobs and shut off the water below the tank. Somehow they managed to find a plumber on Sunday and got a new toilet put in. She made me promise never to tell anyone. The incident forged a stronger bond between her and her brother, she said, because he was so nice about the whole thing and didn't even let her pay for it. But as I said, she broke 2 toilets. The second was about 10 years later in Ohio. This one was in her apartment in the extended care facility in which she lived. I guess the long and the short of it is that she sat down too hard one too many times and the toilet just exploded. And again, water everywhere. She said it went as high as the ceiling. She rang the call button on the wall and the staff came to help her. When she told me about this, she mentioned the other toilet destruction at her brother's house. I think she must have lived down the embarrassment by then, as she didn't mention my promise not to tell. There was one time she was visiting me in Florida. She went into the bathroom and brushed her teeth with a tube of Nair hair remover cream. I called the hospital to make sure she hadn't poisoned herself. She said she saw the tube and didn't look, just assumed it was toothpaste. She said she only kept 1 tube in her bathroom and it contained toothpaste. Well, she never has had to shave her teeth since then anyway. I remember when she became a blonde. My father had to be in Florida for a week or 2 on business. He left a brunette wife at home. When he returned, he found he was married to a blonde. She explained to me that with her fair skin and blue eyes, she shouldn't have had blonde hair. She should have had blonde hair. I don't know what she told my father, but to a man who is easy on the nerves, maybe you don't have to explain. She always told funny stories about her youth. While her mother worked as the bookkeeper of her father's hotel and restaurant supply business, a woman they had hired from off the boat kept house and raised her. She called the woman Mama. Mama cooked, cleaned, raised the children. Her own mother, my grandmother, Bertha, didn't know how to cook. She didn't even know how to care for babies. One time, my mother left my brother in an infant carriage with her. The carriages in those days deserved that name. They were huge, more like smaller versions of the horse-drawn carriages used by European royalty than like the fold-up strollers of today. Anyway, Grandma went to the fish store. As she was leaving, they said to her, "Aren't you forgetting something?" She checked. She had her purse, she had all her packages, but she was walking out without the baby carriage. When my mother got home, she found my brother in the carriage, newly diapered. There were 9 diaper pins pinned neatly across the front of the diaper, not a one of them attaching the front flap to the back. Grandma thought, when she first saw TV, that gray had come back into style. All the clothes and upholstery and drapes on the TV shows were gray. She swore that while her youngest son was in the army in Europe during World War II, that she was so worried about him, she never slept a wink. The night he returned home after his discharge, he rang and rang the doorbell to be let in. She was so sound asleep, he finally had to find a phone and call to wake her up. Although she couldn't cook, I always remember her saying, "S, S." That means eat in Yiddish. She was always pushing food on everyone. She believed it was a good sign if you ate a lot. Offering food was the way she could be a good hostess. Her husband had a brass spittoon in his office and a big red leather electric recliner chair that had buttons like the electric windows on cars. You could make the chair lean back or sit up by using the buttons. I never knew what a spittoon was for, but back then it seemed old men would always be spitting on the streets. In the public buses were signs against expectoration, which is spitting. So I guessed he must spit in that brass spittoon when he was in the house, so as not to have to spit on the floor. That was one of the few pieces of information from my childhood that I didn't just accept, but gave some thought to. She shuddered at the next memory, though it still was funny, too. An uncle once gave my father a big fat cigar. I stole it and ran downstairs into the lobby of the apartment building. I bit a chunk off the end as I had seen in the cartoons and spat it out. Then I put it firmly between my lips and tilted back my head, pretending to be a big shot smoking. All of a sudden, the tobacco inside that cigar began to empty out through the hole and run right down my throat, choking me. How embarrassing. I don't know how or if I ever explained it. I've since learned that men clip a small hole in the end of the cigar before lighting it. I guess it's so that tobacco won't get inhaled down their throats like happened to me. I started out saying it was my mother that was the character. Well, anyway, I know where I got it from. And I will read you some more tomorrow from this story written by a close friend. And when was it written? 1996. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know. This is different than the other story that I read, and I knew this person, so, it's amusing to me, but I don't know if it is to you. So get back with me and let me know. Thanks.